Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
Joining us right now to talk about a letter written to Prime Minister Carney. We'll find out what kind of letter, how stiff the letter was. We're talking to Erin Gowriluk, who is with Canada Grains Council. Erin, how are we doing?
Great. Thank you very much, Shaun.
So how stiff was the letter? Was it like a friendly nudge kind of letter? I don't think it would be like a love letter, but it would. I think there's some things that you want him to be working on.
Look, it's an introductory letter. It's certainly very congenial, but I think, look, at the end of the day, we're going to have the tough conversations about specifically what we need to do once the cabinet is formed and we have those individuals in place to have those conversations. At this point right now, it's looking for alignment between what it is that the agriculture industry needs from this government and what Prime Minister Carney has committed to doing. And I'm excited to say, as reflected in our open letter to the Prime Minister, we have a lot of alignment. I'm feeling very optimistic. We'll learn more, to your point, once the cabinet is in place. But we essentially have called for three things from a high-level perspective.
Okay.
The first thing is around national unity. And he talked about this in his remarks the night of the election when he formed a minority government. There is a need for national unity, I think, on a number of fronts. And the first one is most obvious, and that is with respect to what's happening south of the border. We need national unity amongst the federal parties as they work towards a solution. We need national unity between the federal government and all of the provinces. And we need unity amongst ag sector stakeholders. And I think that Carney has talked about the need to achieve unity. And there's nothing better in our view than reaching out to the agriculture sector as a national unity project in action. If you want to touch and have a positive impact on rural communities in every province across the country, work with agriculture. Work to ensure that the sector can reach its full potential. And you'll be able to advance policies that bring farmers together from both East and Western Canada. And he's made a commitment to do that. So I would suggest one place to start is through agriculture. And I think that internationally, we need to hit a reset button. And I'm not just talking about what's happening with the Trump administration in the US, with China, and with India. But when I travel internationally, and I talked about this in the letter, we're hearing from international stakeholders that the world needs more Canada and they need a different Canada. We need a bolder Canada. And we can talk more in a moment, Shaun, about that, how we show up in some of those international multilateral forums and the role that the US has historically played. We're going to need an advocate for diplomacy, for science, and that is an important role that Canada can play because we're well positioned to do that as a trusted advisor. And then finally, in the letter, we talked from a high level perspective. And look, if you have a prime minister who is committed to the economy, and he has made that point front and center. But I think it was interesting to see in his remarks, his first remarks as prime minister, when he addressed the nation, he talked about science. We believe in science, and that's obviously a direct reflection of what's happening in the United States. That bodes well for the agriculture sector, because what we need now is a regulatory framework that reflects that commitment to science, because that's going to help drive the Canadian economy when we reassure many of those private companies that this is a place where you can do business.
But that belief in science has to happen with some sort of like speed or velocity to it, because I think that sometimes you can, if you just say, hey, we need to be, science-based, we get bogged down in the science.
Yeah, I think what the first thing that we can do is, look, the first example that we have from a council perspective in terms of what we can do here in Canada is hit the pause on the transformation agenda, which we know from the Pest Management Regulatory Agency that was politically motivated. There's no denying that. So it's time now to hit the pause button on the transformation agenda, which has cost us upwards of $80 million to this point and achieved absolutely nothing for the agriculture industry. Once we can hit the pause button on that and acknowledge that it's moving in the wrong direction, then we need to have the right conversation about how we ensure agencies like the PMRA work to make the ag sector more competitive and that their policies are rooted in science. And so that's the first conversation we're going to have. Hit the pause button and look to the industry for some recommendations on what transformation really looks like and how that transformation is very clearly going to align with the objectives so far that Prime Minister Carney has stated around the economy and science-driven policies.
From a trade perspective, what do you want trade to look like, or the attention it gets? How do you want that to look different than the Trudeau regime?
I think acknowledging the important role that trade plays in advancing key sectors like Canada's agriculture sector, I think, and considering the impact that some of these international decisions have on the agriculture sector, because I think we can all agree that under the previous administration, little consideration was given to some of how of these short-term reactions, these political reactions, the impact that would have on the agriculture industry. We no longer are the sacrificial lamb. We cannot be. And so consider the impact that those decisions are going to have on Canada's agriculture industry and think carefully about the decisions you take and the impact they'll have. And I'm optimistic that this government is going to give the sector more consideration and be more pragmatic in their approach to the relationships with these important trading partners. That, coupled, I think, with a renewed diversification strategy, is going to be really important. And I'm not suggesting for a second that this is easy. We know that the challenge that we face right now with respect to what's happening in the United States and China is a very fine line to walk. It's not going to be an easy one, but we need to see the Canadian government in particular at a very high level back to the table, having those conversations with Chinese officials. It's a critically important market, and it's one that we need to work to restore.
You mentioned, or you emphasize, collaboration with government from an industry perspective. What does that look like?
Look, we can point to a whole host of examples, and very often, and I'm sure, Shaun, in the conversations that you've had previously with ministers and officials, they'll point to a whole host of roundtables, working groups, committees, and councils that were struck to engage the agriculture industry. That's not the kind of engagement that we're looking for at this point. I think what we're looking for is outcomes-based, no longer process-based. And so we pointed to all of those forums through which what? To what end? So I think we need to be laser focused on what we're trying to achieve and figure out the best means to get there. And that may not necessarily be the establishment of another advisory committee or council, but working quickly with the sector. We've done the work. We know what the sector needs to do, and they need to work quickly with a very competent, capable, and I would suggest an ag minister who is free to take those decisions and has a prominent place at the cabinet table to work closely with the industry and bring those challenges to the cabinet table in an effort to advance them. That's what we're going to need to see when Prime Minister Carney strikes his new cabinet.
Are there things that, in your mind, that Canada could be doing to better attract, whether that's domestic capital into the sector or international capital into the sector, whether that's in processing, whether that's in ag tech, innovation? What are your thoughts there?
I can think of a couple of things. I think the first one would be to the earlier point around creating an environment of predictability. And that science-based regulatory framework is going to be critically important to creating that predictability in an environment where investors can trust that Canada is a place worthy of their investment. And we're going to create a framework that will shepherd that investment in the Canadian economy. And I think the other piece is, and Carney talked about this in one of his opening speeches, Shaun, and that was around spend less, invest more. And I'll tell you how I interpret that, or what I hope that means. What I hope that means from a banker's perspective is that we're going to look strategically at sectors that can offer a return on investment, and we're going to double down on our investment in those sectors. We're going to make those contributions strategic and meaningful in an effort to help them reach their full potential, because they can catalyze the Canadian economy. And so I hope that we are going to continue to take I hope that Carney is going to follow through on that commitment to make those investments both strategic and meaningful.
Agriculture would be one of those sectors I'm assuming you're thinking of? It
would be. And I think that what we have seen, as we've seen from the previous government, is the spending, in my view, was largely politically motivated. And so you would see a little money for this group and a little money for this sector. And I think you have to be more strategic in those investments. And frankly, at the end of the day, that means picking winners and losers. And you have to hone in on those high potential sectors that can really deliver. And we can point to a whole host of reports, and Barton was one of them, where he identified under the previous government a number of those high potential sectors. Ag is one of them. And so we have to make those investments where they really count.
What if they think ag's not in that club?
You know what? I think to a certain extent, that's on us. And so first of all, two things. I'm going to be watching to see who the Prime Minister appoints as the Agriculture Minister, because I think we need someone who brings a new level of energy and enthusiasm. And I think that choice is also going to reflect the prominence that they have at the cabinet table. But I think as industry, two doors, I think, have opened for us, certainly from a council perspective. One as it relates to the economy, and the other as it relates to science and innovation. It's up to us now to walk through those doors. And I think we have to bring a very aligned message as an industry to this government, because they do need to work quickly. They are in a minority situation where I think that the Prime Minister feels he has a lot to deliver in a short period of time. What are some of the low-hanging fruit that they can deliver on behalf of the industry? We have to articulate that clearly and consistently as an industry. And I think that we need to provide a vision for where we could ultimately go and align those asks with where the government wants to go. And it's going to be much easier for us to do that under this administration than it was with the previous administration, because the economy will be front and center.
Yeah, there are some people in the audience that really feel strongly that one big difference we're going to see with Carney is moving fast on things. And a part of that is because of, we talked about this on RealAg Radio on last Friday, which in the bonus segment, if you haven't heard that, you should go back and listen to it, everybody. Produced a very emotional discussion because of the national unity issues, and because national unity is important to him, and I think is one of his greatest challenges. He needs to show some action. And I think some people really believe that that's what we're going to get out of him, that will be different.
Yeah. And look, I'm an Albertan living in the province of Quebec, so I'm kind of hypersensitive to what's happening at the provincial level, and the need to bring that kind of unity, not just in terms of what we saw previously under Trudeau's government, just when in response to what was happening south of the border. But I think now beyond that, in addressing some of the issues that are taking place at the provincial level. And I would suggest, and Shaun, you'll know better than I know in terms of how the conversations are going in particular with your premier, but I think having some of those early conversations and a real commitment to the economic development that has to occur also at the provincial level is going to go a long way. And that's why I think the conversation needs to start with agriculture, because you have that presence in every province across the country. And if you want to see that kind of unity, if you want to bring the country together, you can do that in rural communities from Quebec to Alberta and beyond, by working closely with the agriculture industry. So that's clearly articulated in our letter to the Prime Minister. Leverage the ag sector for that.
Great stuff. Hey, Erin, thanks a lot for joining us here today on RealAg Radio. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.